And so eventually you breathe salt water and I drowned. Well, it's interesting. I found myself immediately in this blackness, this absolute blackness. There was no more roaring of the sea. I wasn't cold. I was very comfortable. It was quiet. It was serene. It was calm. And I thought, wow, this isn't anything like I experienced in my diver training or anything like that. You know, this is way beyond anything I'd ever experienced. And so I was curious because I just came from this very violent environment to this absolute peace and calm. And the funny thing was that I didn't feel like I was alone. I felt like I was just part of something, that there was this infinite presence available, but it was absolute darkness and I couldn't see anything. And I was very curious. And then I saw this light, and it was just the speck of light, but it felt like I was moving toward it, or it was moving toward me. And as I got closer, I started to feel this warm embrace of love that was coming. It was emanating from that light. And as I got closer and closer, I started to see that the light was made up of millions upon millions of fragments of light. And they were all moving in unison together, you know, kind of like a school of fish, actually. But they were all coordinated and of one mind. And I was just absolutely fascinated in watching these fragments of light and the movement of light and color and everything that they were displaying. And as I got closer, 3 fragments broke away. And all the time that I was moving toward this light, I kept feeling love more and more and more, stronger and stronger. Well, 3 fragments broke away, and as they came closer, I recognized them as family, but not any family that I'd lived in this life with, but just a recognition of that this was a family. And they communicated to me a thought, a meaning, a perception of welcome home. And I'll tell you, it was the most emotional homecoming I think I could have ever experienced. Because in my life, I grew up in a very dysfunctional type of family environment. I moved from one family to the next, to the next, to the next. I never really got a sense of being a part of a family. But here, these 3 beings at first greeted me, and eventually a dozen came, and they were my family. I like to think of them as a soul family. And they were welcoming me home. And they communicated to me that we were going to go deeper into the light. And as we did, we went into this area that I perceived as being spherical, round, like inside a ball. And we started to relive my life. And when I say we, I meant myself. I started to experience it as if I was reliving it. But not only from my perspective, but from everyone I'd ever interacted with. So it was like my consciousness fragmented into these multiple streams of consciousness, and I was reliving my life and re-experiencing it from all these different points of view. And not only was I experiencing it this way, but my soul family, these beings that greeted me home and welcomed me home, they were experiencing it the same way. And when I became aware of that, I was a little, well, I have to say, I brought with me some of my fears that, you know, these people didn't want to see some of the things that I had done, because I became a chief engineer in my early 20s. And, you know, I was a brash young man, and my philosophy was to cut your swath through life. And that's how you got by. And that's a pretty brutal philosophy. It really doesn't take anyone else into consideration. So they got to experience this reliving of my life, but they didn't judge me. In fact, if anything, they supported me. They loved me. And it felt almost as if they were excited to be in this process with me of reviewing my life, of looking at my life. It was this incredible experience after experience that just kept evolving and growing and becoming bigger. And it was awe-inspiring and humbling all at the same time. To see how much we really affect one another was quite amazing. But I got to a point where I was not seeing things that I could relate to. I had gotten past the point of my drowning. I didn't realize it at the time, but I was actually perceiving parts of my future. The interesting thing was that in the part where I had lived my life, that was crystal clear. But when I passed that threshold into my future life, then it wasn't quite as clear. It was like I was looking down a corridor, and that corridor was clear. It was like out of focus, but I had this corridor of clarity, and it felt like I could go off to the right if I wanted and come back, or go off to the left a little bit if I wanted and come back. And I got the feeling that that was what we would consider as our free will. And so I kept going down this corridor and experiencing things that I really didn't have any reference to. In fact, if anything, it kind of disoriented me a little bit because of that lack of reference, until I got to this certain point where the unity of these lights, all of this light that was surrounding this bubble, spoke in unison, and it said, "This is not your time. You must return." And I perceived all this unity of light as God. And they told me, this is not your time. You must return. And I said, no way. I am loved like I've never been loved before. I have a family that I didn't even realize existed. And there's this expansiveness here, this freedom. And so I argued. I said, no way, I'm not going back. Because I knew that my body was broken. It was in that ocean and it was just broken. I just had no desire to go back. Well, the light spoke one more time. It said, you must return. You have a purpose.